Welcome everybody to the Loc Tools Study Group Chat GPT enabled portion and information from BureauWorks with today's presenter. This is Gabriel Fairman. Say hi, Gabriel.
Hey everybody, very nice to be here with everyone. Thank you so much, Marina, for hosting this. I'm a big fan of your work and it's delightful to be here with you.
Thank you so much. Gabriel, very interesting CEO you are. You've been in a Zen Buddhist monastery in your past. That's very
I have.
interesting. Very unusual. Brings a certain calm to your work,
Yeah,
perhaps.
I don't think it shows in my personality, but yeah, I did spend 6 months at a Zen Buddhist monastery meditating.
That's awesome. That's very cool. And with your work as translator and PM and having the translation language services in your family all around you, it's an interesting position to be where you've taken the tools and added technology enablement and bringing a bright new future to this business and what you have over at BureauWorks. Can you just talk for just a minute about your company, how you brought that all around and where you are today, and just kind of a summary?
Absolutely. Well, I set off in this trajectory in the translation and localization space back in 2005. So it's going to be 18 years this year since I founded BureauWorks. Um, Originally a translation agency based in Sao Paulo, Brazil. We evolved, started to get very early on into tech. We're currently headquartered just outside San Francisco, California. I'm based in Lafayette, it's a small town just outside San Francisco. Our goal was always to solve problems effectively, and realize pretty early on that without a lot of expertise around information technology, that wouldn't be possible. And as much as I loved languages, as much as I saw my mother as a translator all her life, and translated quite a bit myself, I realized pretty soon that languages, as much as close to my heart as it is, it really only works, at least for me, with the right kind of tech. So to me, they're very intimately connected, the idea of language and technology. Okay, Marina, can you see my screen? I think
Yes,
I believe I
looks
shared it.
great.
Perfect. Okay,
Perfect.
perfect. So these are just a few slides I put together before I cut into the actual demonstration. But just to give people a little bit of perspective, like I mentioned, we're a translation and localization technology company headquartered in just outside San Francisco, in California, and we have a translation management system we call BWX. And we've worked very closely with our data science team and machine learning team over the past few years around pushing the limits of what we could do with trained and tuned and self-built models. So we had already quite a bit of efforts in that direction. And as I would say a big part of the community, we were excited about the innovation that ChatGPT brought to the table, and really looked for ways to maximize at least what initial explorations into what is possible through ChatGPT. And as a large language model, but not limited to ChatGPT. So that's why we're calling it context-aware translation with large language models. We're working with other models as well, but ChatGPT 3 is a very evolved model that's able to produce, in many circumstances, quite astounding results. And I particularly take suspiciously optimistic perspective around artificial intelligence. I understand that it has deep and even potentially troubling limitations, but it also opens the door for things that previously weren't possible or feasible at scale. So I'm going to explain, obviously, and show what context-aware translation with large language models means, but this is just a preamble as to what the talk and demonstration today is going to be about. I'm not going to be focusing on a full demo around BureauWorks. I'm really going to be focused on our ability to produce context-aware translations within our translation editor. Make sense, Marina?
Yeah, that sounds great. Go ahead.
Perfect. All right, so we're focused on providing translators with effective solutions. So we try to take a look at some of the pain points that we know are present for translators. It's just broadly speaking, but translators need to provide clients with quotes or agencies with quotes. They occasionally work with peers. That's pretty frequent. They need to manage the quality and the performance of those peers, manage the timely completion of those jobs, deliver these jobs, invoice their clients, pay their peers when they work with peers, and they need to generate, in the end, what we call a gross profit, but is basically the idea of efficiency, right? And that's where we come in. We try to drive as much efficiency as we can into the translation process. Let me go here to the next slide. And just again, I touched on it, but BureauWorks is a multifaceted translation management system. It covers everything from glossaries to payables to quality assurance. I'm not going to go into all the different facets today. Just want to make sure that it's clear that we do tackle quite a few different number of problems and situations and opportunities. We have over 36,000 active users worldwide and growing. So we're excited about where we are. We're excited about where we're taking things. We have a very talented and innovative engineering team. And these things keep us excited and on our toes. So let's talk about the idea of what context-aware translations are. So the idea is that in the past, right, machine translation is both an amazing solution in very specific kinds of situations, and it can also be a pain. It can be a pain to edit machine translation feeds. It can be embarrassing, cringy, it can unacceptable. Machine translation really, at least my experience as a translator using machine translation in the languages that I am able to speak, has always been, I would say at best, conflictuous, and it definitely has improved over time. It's able to produce very sophisticated feeds in certain situations. It can be surprisingly good, can also be surprisingly bad. It's one of those things, that fascinates me about language. It's that even as machine translation becomes asymptotically good and better, so it gets better and better, closer to 100%, let's say, but there's always that gap, right? It could be 1%, it could be 10%, it can be 20%. It doesn't really matter, in my opinion, how big the edit distance that's necessary to go from machine translation to human quality. What matters is that if in language that 0.5% or that tiny fraction of a word that requires an edit, that could make all the difference from something being amazing to embarrassing. So let's say the quantitative gap doesn't reflect from a qualitative perspective how big the gap can be. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, cool. So when we talk about where we're comparing the previous paradigm versus the evolved paradigm, right? In the previous paradigm, at least what most people I know work with, and again, I'm sure that there are quite a few people that work with different kinds of paradigms and different kinds of solutions. But essentially, the pre-translation process is about getting a text, parsing and segmenting it into a translation management system, and processing it against a translation memory. That's for sure. That's definitely what pre-translation means. And in some cases, using machine translation to fill in the blanks. So basically, a typical pre-translation step will have, okay, I'm going to populate every single cell, that every single segment that's above a certain threshold, right? So maybe I'm going to populate everything above 50%, maybe everything above 75%. I'm going to choose a threshold, and I'm going to populate that. And whatever is below that threshold, I'm either going to leave empty for translators to complete, or I'm going to populate that with machine translation. So it's a fairly, there's not a single standard for pre-translation. I know people who like to pre-translate only context matches, the 101%. I know people that like to pre-translate everything that they can leverage from the translation memory after 50% leveraging. I know people who love inserting machine translation in the process, and I know people who abhor it. So there's not a single way about it, but the overall framework is pretty much the same: text, translation memory, and when not available, either leaving it empty or some kind of machine translation, right? And what we observe typically in the previous paradigm, particularly compared to what we're calling an evolved paradigm, is larger edit distances, longer time to edit in a single feed. So basically, what I'm describing here is that whatever output I get from either the translation memory, if it's a fuzzy match, right? Assuming it's not a context match, if whatever output I get from machine translation plus, or translation memory plus whatever output I get from machine translation, it will typically require me as a translator to input quite a bit of work to get that to human quality. Either I'm going to have to look at the original text and compare it to what's in the translation memory and make those adjustments to make that fuzzy go into perfect match. Either I'm going to have to read through the machine translation and sometimes laugh, sometimes love, sometimes cry, and have all those emotions that machine translation typically evokes in me. And essentially, it can be a lot of work, and it can also be a frustrating process. I mean, I think as a translator, I've seen this again and again, translation memories that are not reliable, translation memories that are discrepant from the latest changes to the glossaries that are being made, and making sure that the glossaries are being taken into account in machine translation feeds. So you start, if you're not careful, and it's very difficult to be careful at scale. So basically, if you're not careful, which is the norm, the case with pre-translation processes, you basically have to run them and submit them to translators. You can't necessarily check and optimize finally the pre-translation process for each and every translation. It's just not feasible from an engineering perspective. So it creates, in my opinion, quite a bit of tension, right? What am I going to see? What's going to be in this in this box of surprises? And sometimes you're lucky and you're working with a translation memory that's crisp and clean and everything's perfect. There's no discrepancies with the glossary. The machine translation for that specific domain was super tuned, super trained. And it's not that the previous paradigm cannot produce good results. It can, and it does. But there are so many points where it doesn't offer translators what we believe could be possible, right? And that's why we've been exploring, and I emphasize the word exploring, because one of the key things that I think is very important to take into account about ChatGPT and large language models, but particularly ChatGPT, wasn't meant to be a translation engine, right? It's very different when you compare, let's say, a translation engine powered by Microsoft or by Google. Those were translation engines designed for that. Those were machine translations, whether statistical based, whether neural based. Those were engines devised solely for the purpose of delivering machine translation, whereas large language models are focused on being able to go through billions of parameters in order to guess in the most educated way possible what the next word should be in any given sentence, and by that magic produce often content that's surprisingly good and uncannily seems like it could have been produced by a human being. I mean, people have read things about this. I mean, in some cases, the output can be so good, whereas people are wondering where sentience begins and where consciousness begins. And in other cases, it can be so bad that people are like, nah, ChatGPT, forget it. It's terrible with logic, which it is. It's not. There are clear limitations around what it does and what it doesn't. And again, particularly because it wasn't meant as a translation model, it performs very differently in different languages and different situations. So I use the word explore because this is all very new, and we're learning and experimenting, but we are very keen on understanding just how much can be done as far as making the life of a translator better, and making the overall translation experience more productive, more effective, and more focused on having fun with language and not like cringing over whatever crazy thing a machine translation can be capable of producing. But go ahead, Maria, you were going to say something?
Well, I think those are really good points that you're bringing up, that it's new, it's exploration, it's learning and seeing what it is. And especially GPT, there's generativeness in that whole idea and what that was designed to do. So I think this is really exciting how we're talking about how it was before and how you're evolving. So I just wanted to interject that. So continue.
Thank you. Super on point. And so what we're doing with, again, what we're calling an evolved paradigm, and it's always a matter of perspective. Somebody can, I'm open to the claim that it's not evolved at all. But what we're doing is we're using the contextual capabilities of a large language model to produce a translation feed that's, in our opinion, potentially a lot better and more finely tuned to how people think and work with language. So instead of just taking text and having, let's say, a gate that chooses, okay, over 75% translation memory, below 75% machine translation or empty, something like that, and that it is having constantly to train models and update terms, we're working with a micro learning approach where we can, for any given segment, take into account what the translation memory is offering, what the machine translation is offering, what the glossaries are saying, and what the large language model has to say as far as as an arbitrator. What does it have to say regarding all of that, right? And I'll show in the demonstration piece how this works exactly, but just conceptually, right? The idea is that if you're able to produce a translation feed that's more aligned with how people think and how people work with language, chances are that you're going to be able to make people more productive and potentially on a good day with some good coffee or good tea, happier in the process. So that's the overall description of what I'm going to show. So any questions there?
I don't see questions coming in right now, and I don't have any questions. It's all sitting back and watching. So
okay,
go right ahead.
Perfect. So I'm going to take a break from the slides because I don't like boring people too much. And I've switched on to our translation editor in BureauWorks. Can you see my editor, Marina?
Looks good.
Okay, so this is a small translation project that I created for the purposes of this demo. It's based on our web homepage that's here showing on our preview. The content that has been translated. I'm working with Brazilian Portuguese, which is my mother tongue, and it's not that I'm not going to make mistakes working with Brazilian Portuguese. I'm going to make a lot of them, but at least fewer than or less embarrassing mistakes than if I were to work with languages that I know nothing about. So the segments that you see here in green have already been confirmed just as the purpose of this demo, and they're coming in as 101%. I turned on machine translation also for the purpose of this demo, so you can see in any given segment the difference of what's coming in from our translation memory and the machine translation. And this is no coincidence. I confirmed whatever came in these cases from machine translation because I thought it was okay. So just to demonstrate that machine translation is perfectly capable of, in given situations, producing very high quality feeds. And like I said, in other situations, really bad. But the first thing that we're going to see here is, so this segment, and I'm going to spend quite a bit of time talking about a specific segment because otherwise it's very difficult to show exactly the magic that's happening here. So forgive me, everybody, in advance if I get overly linguistical about this, but it's there's no other way to really show what this can do, right? So right here we have a segment. There's one glossary term that says that translation should be this term in Portuguese. We have a machine translation feed that's saying gerencie traduções do seu jeito, which is one way of saying manage translations your way. That translation is not incorrect. But you do have a 50% feed coming from the translation memory that says the same thing with a different spin that would kind of back translate to English as like translate on your own. And obviously that makes sense that it wouldn't be exactly the same because it's a 50% match. And then a 67% match that says manage contents to your taste, to your style, kind of that would back translate, right? But basically you have these different fuzzies and a different machine translation feed, right? And if I ask AI to translate this, it produced a third situation, which is different from the machine translation. And it's also different from the fuzzy. It's almost kind of a merge here between both of them. And it's literally says gerencie traduções ao seu estilo, which would back translate to translate according to your style, literally, right? But the key thing is that it's not just accepting whatever is coming from the machine translation. It's also not just ignoring what's in the translation memory. It's taking that into account. And let me apply this translation. See, right now I have the machine translation populated in segment number 5. I'm going to apply this translation. It replaced it. And now, just as an example, before I confirm this translation, I want to know what ChatGPT has to say about this. So I'm asking ChatGPT for its opinion, and it's suggesting that I should change it to another thing, gerencie traduções do seu jeito, which is the machine translation suggestion. And it says its explanation that the suggested translation is more colloquial and conveys the same meaning as the original phrase. That's ChatGPT's opinion. I'm going to ignore that and override that. I like mine better. But we're seeing here
Cool.
quite two. Go ahead, Marina. You're going to say something.
Yeah, and I was going to say the review, QA, all of this is the choice. That's the powerful part. And that puts the humanity back into the process. So what you're
Correct.
talking about here is vital and what everybody's hoping. Yes, you can keep your jobs because your selection is going to inform. Also, is that true? It's going to
Hmm. No,
train the engine.
100%. It's at least our perspective, my perspective is that this, I mean, I don't see, and again, everybody has their own opinion about this, but in my opinion, I don't see any of this replacing human beings. Not now, and I don't have a crystal ball to understand what's going to happen 5, 10 years down the road. What's going to happen with artificial general intelligence once it emerges, if it emerges. But in our perspective, at least what we currently have is a situation where we can actually empower more and value more those creative choices that are made. Hopefully, if an engine like this works really well, let's say optimally, and let's say a translator has to make, in a perfect scenario, 0 changes, right? Their set of eyes is still invaluable as far as validating, as far as understanding, as far as confirming, as far as evaluating, gaining an extra dimension of knowledge. But what I notice as a translator is that I feel more supported, and I feel the feed that's coming to me is there's more thought that's put into it, number one. And there's also this capability of dialoguing with the engine provides me with options. And like I said, in this case, I'm rejecting what the AI review is telling me. And one thing that's very interesting here is why would this AI suggestion in the translation window be different from the AI review? And I'm going to explain why. So the AI suggestion in the translation window that says gerencie traduções ao seu estilo, that's being purposely trained by the glossary and by the translation memory feed. Now, the AI review, we've intentionally left it untrained so that whatever perspective that it's offering is coming from a different kind of angle. So this is like, without all this training, without these restrictions, how do I see this text? You know, what sounds best to me as a large language model? So those are 2 different steps, right? One step is the conversation around this, and then the other step is the actual translation feed. Any questions, Marina?
Not so far. I'm looking on several different places of back channels, and everybody's just really pouring into this. So keep going.
Okay, so I'm going to confirm this segment. It's flagging a glossary mismatch. That's okay. I'm going to override this, and the segment is now confirmed. Now, let me go here to the next segment. And maybe in this example, things are going to be also clear. So in this case, we have a 93% match, but we have quite a bit of terms that are in our glossary. So translation management system is in the glossary, localization management is the glossary, translation is in the glossary, and cloud-based is in the glossary, right? So we have quite a few different glossary terms. And if I look at whatever is coming from the machine translation, I know this just as an example here, it's translating cloud-based instead of using the word tecnologia cloud, which is one way of saying cloud-based. It's basically referring it as baseado em nuvem, which to me sounds, at least my opinion, sounds really awkward in Portuguese. And the whole sentence, it's understandable, but in my opinion, the machine version of this isn't necessarily the most intelligible or elegant way of expressing this, and it's definitely not following the glossary below, right? Now, when I ask AI to translate this, now it's going to, again, take into account the different scenarios. And like you see here with the glossary, it translated cloud-based to Technologia Cloud. Now Technologia Cloud is here. I'm going to apply this translation. It updated the segment. So now it's taking into account whatever is in the translation memory at this 93% match, but it's also injecting the glossary terms where they were missing. And we're still gonna see false positives as far as term checking. That's still gonna happen, but it is injecting those terms. And again, I can also review this or ask AI to review this for me, see if it has any additional suggestions. And it is suggesting a different sentence. It's saying, oh, I'm not going to read this in Portuguese, but it's explaining this. And that's one of the things that I love is just not just that you're being offered a suggestion, but an explanation. So it's inducing a thought process in me. It's saying the suggested translation more accurately conveys the meaning of the original sentence by using the term blah instead of blah to refer to the management of translation and localization. And this is because this term is more commonly used in Portuguese to refer to the management of a process or system. So that's food for thought, right? As a translator, I can be like, does that make sense for me or not? And in this case, it's suggesting, let me think, like, do I like it better?
Mm-hmm.
And no, I don't like it better. Again,
Nice.
I like mine better. But
Wow.
the point is that I feel more confidence now about my translation, because it didn't spot an error, and it does flag for simple, more, let's say, not just stylistic things, but it does flag for grammar errors or spelling errors, things like that. It's all about the parameters that we feed it, but we're more focused on, or at least right now, is there a better way of saying the same thing and why? And now I feel more confident about the choices that I made. And this is something, Marina, that I think is particularly interesting, is that it makes me aware of choices that sometimes I didn't even realize I made. Like, for instance, I didn't think about this word that ChatGPT is questioning me on. I just used it, just seemed to me the natural word. It's also in the glossary. So I'm following whatever's in the glossary. But ChatGPT is offering me an alternative, a way to rethink whether or not what I'm doing makes sense. So I'm going to pause here a second and see if there's anything in the Q&A that you think I should be answering.
Yeah, we do. Okay, so I love this interactiveness, this exchange and reviewing and thinking and choosing. That's fantastic. And for example, when a really big change happens, how cool would it be to employ a system like this? For example, in Brazil, I recall spelling had changed, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago, a while ago, and a mass change in spelling had occurred. And I don't know the full extent of it, but when something big like that happens, great to have this happening. Just a quick question from Mary Arsenio. Is this 93% match coming from the TM?
Yes, whatever is here, this is coming from the translation memory. It's coming from BWO languages translation memory.
Right. Okay, great. Right. And then a little more from Boriana. When you say ChatGPT, you mean the platform with public access or else. So is this a special blend of ChatGPT, or is this just, the open model AI inserted into it? Where's that coming from?
Great question. So, like I said, we have our own models and treatment that we give to language on our side. What we use and extract from ChatGPT are a few API endpoints that are available for subscribers. So we use API endpoints to send and receive only the data that is selected to be sent and received. So for instance, if I hit here the AI review button. That's going to trigger sending over information to ChatGPT, getting ChatGPT's response back. As far as the micro training, micro learning mechanism that also involves ChatGPT as an arbitrator, that also has that API component as well. But it's not, like I said, it's not just limited to ChatGPT. We have other models as well that work in tandem to inform and drive ChatGPT towards the right, towards the responses that we're looking for.
Great. Okay. And then Boriana says in a question, you mentioned intentionally left untrained. Does this mean it doesn't take into account TM entries and the preference on personal versus polite or plural form? Does that make sense?
In this AI review button, like I'm showing over here, like I'm going to click this again on this segment. That's the part that's intentionally untrained. And so, for instance,
Okay.
in this case, it's suggesting to revert what the translation for start for free. It's suggesting to say it basically as start without any cost, because it sounds better in Portuguese as not a giveaway, but just something that doesn't have any cost associated to it, which is closer in ChatGPT's opinion to starting for free. So in this review, we intentionally left out the glossary and the translation memory so that we could get, let's say, a more neutral perspective. It is possible to, let's say, guide this review as well. There's nothing that prevents us from doing that, to, let's say, restricting the review to also abiding to translation memory and glossary preferences. That's fine. It's just that, in our opinion, it becomes, if we were to do that, then it would become redundant with this component here, where it's generating a translation that's based on what's coming from the machine translation and what's coming from the translation memory. And another thing that's interesting here is, well, based on our research, and we have I think a paper that's over 55 pages long that we're willing to share with whoever is interested in, and it has the time to go through it. But what we noticed is that ChatGPT so far performs better when it's given a initial baseline, even if that initial baseline is wrong, than if it doesn't have an initial baseline. But again, these are just very early experiments on our end. That's why we, even if we don't have, in this case, for instance, there's nothing in the translation memory, we're still offering the machine translation as an initial starting point for ChatGPT. Make
Very
sense?
good. Yep, that sounds good. It seems like,
So,
yeah, that was answered.
Yeah, and in this case, for instance, just to show an example, I actually like the suggestion that ChatGPT has for this. So in this case, I am going to implement its suggestions. I'm going to replace the text with what it suggested, and I'm going to confirm that. And now, now that feed is in. Now that feed has been confirmed. Now this is a good example here, Marina, of a really, really, really bad machine translation fail, in my opinion. Machine translation got confused with the plus signal. It got confused with the company name, so it translated the company name.
The work means works.
yeah. So it literally changes, like yeah. It's funny if it weren't tragic, right?
Yeah.
So, but this is an example of where now, if I asked the AI to translate this, the key thing is now the sentence makes sense, because it didn't keep it. Also, the machine translation wasn't able to. It got really confused. For the machine translation, kind of thought that the company name was Trust Bureau and that worked was a verb. And I mean, I don't blame it. It's a sentence that can be difficult to understand, right? But the engine got it right on. It really literally says over 300 companies trust Bureau works. So the back translation works completely. I'm going to apply this translation. Now it's updated the segments. And I can also ask AI to review this one as well. But essentially, this is a really good case where, and it made a very small change here, could add more context. For instance, you could say it's actually suggesting to increase the sentence with things that aren't even present in the source, just to make it feel more comfortable to the reader. I'm going to reject that because that's not my role. Again, what's really cool is that you can see clearly how a, let's say, terrible, cringy machine translation feed now was transformed into a very usable and confirmable pre-translation feed. I'm going to confirm that right here.
Cool.
So again, what's really important here is just how powerful the solution can be, right? Taking into account translation memory, machine translation, and glossaries. So let me find another example over here. So again, with this example, you have an 89% match from the translation memory. That's very similar to what's in the machine, what came originally from the machine translation, but is not respecting the glossary. So there are a few key terms here that were not respected, right? And one of the key terms is that engine, which we want to keep in Portuguese as engenho, which could be a clumsy word, but technically it's the word that we would like to use, became mechanism. And instead of curated, actually became like curadoria, which is a different concept in my opinion, and different from the glossary, which I want to use this word, which depurada, which more closely kind of resembles being distilled or being finely selected, right? And again, if I ask AI to translate this, it's going to take into account all of that. And you can see here that it respected, I'm going to apply this translation, it's going to replace. Now you can see here that it's respecting the glossary, right? The tokenized entry engine here became engenho, which is exactly what's in the glossary. And the word curated here became depurado, which is exactly what's in the glossary. And translation became tradução. But again, what's super amazing about this is that it's not that our model is just injecting glossary terms into a machine translation feed, which is something that people were already able to do. It's adapting the entire linguistical structure of the feed that's being offered to the translator so that the sentence makes sense and is readable, usable. So not just, injecting these terms and then saying, well, sorry if the subject verb agreement is messed up. Sorry if the sentence is now super awkward. You can fix it. It's like, oh, this is how I would say it. And the question for the translator is, how would you say it? And maybe the translator's like, yeah, this sounds good to me, but let me ask again, is there a better way of saying the same thing? And here's where AI is going to review this as well and provide me with its response. And in this case, the API, obviously, because let me see here. In this case, I guess ChatGPT doesn't want to provide me with the response, but let's wait just a few seconds to see if it does come back. It's a bigger segment. But go ahead, Marina, you were going to say something? Yeah, it did. There it goes. It wouldn't. Okay. I knew it wouldn't leave me hanging in the demo. Here you go. So it's suggesting this different feed and blah blah blah, and because I think the sentence is very long, it created an error. That's why it was taking longer. But it is still explaining to me what it would change and why. And I'm going to confirm this segment again. So again, just to review, the key thing that we're seeing here is the possibility of injecting terms into the translation feed. And if I change terms or apply these terms in real time, it does take those choices into account. So that's something that's very important. It's not just, let's say, again, with the previous paradigm, like let's say you have a glossary and that glossary went through changes, that will mean that those changes will have to be retrained. The entire model will have to be redeployed to make sure that those changes are taken into account. The way we're taking this, it's taking these changes at a segment by segment level. I mean, I see we have one more question, Marina. I don't know.
We actually have 3 more questions, so
okay, great.
Let's get through those. And this is also fascinating. All right. Let's see. Manuela asked, great idea to use GPT as a revision tool. Does it allow to change the register of a written string? That is, in terms of formality or informality or other criteria.
Yeah, as next iterations, we're going to allow users to iterate with the suggestions that are coming from GPT, and we're also going to allow more finely tuned preferences, such as the ones that Manuela was mentioning, such as tone or style, so that we can, let's say, guide the perspective of the reviewer, or create a reviewer persona that makes sense for what we're looking for, right? Let's say a reviewer that is looking for edgier translations, or a reviewer that's looking for more conservative translations, and so on. So that's a great question, because it does change very significantly based on our initial explorations, the kinds of comments that are output by ChatGPT.
Excellent. Okay, and I'll verify that was all completely answered. So now another one. Oh, here's a really good question, I think. Isabel's asking this, and I believe Boriana had asked others. Do you have data on confidentiality and client data and how it gets mixed between projects? How can we build a smart machine translation at the same time securing clients' information and data?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So we have our own privacy policy. We treat data very specifically, and we're a SOC 2 Type 2 compliant company. We follow very stringent criteria around how data gets handled. As BureauWorks users, our clients can choose and consent to which engines they want to share data with. So for instance, you can enable or disable as a BureauWorks user the connectivity with ChatGPT as a translation aid, right? That's number one. So you can disable that at your account level. So let's say if privacy is a huge concern, you can disable any kind of data sharing with ChatGPT or any external sources of data. So that's a let's say a prerequisite of BureauWorks, is being able to allow users to decide whether or not they want to turn this on or off. Provided that it's turned on, the only data that does get shared is when, let's say over here, just as an example, when I ask AI to translate this, that specific segment gets sent over to ChatGPT. If I ask, and let me apply this translation over here, if I ask AI to review this specific review, and oh my God, this is just an example of a really cringy review, in my opinion. Doesn't make any sense. So again, I like seeing those, because it's like, oof, okay, I still do have value as a human being with a biological brain. But anyway,
Thank you for your honesty and your candor. Keep going.
Yeah. So as far as what ChatGPT does, OpenAI has its own privacy policy, and again, it's a matter of, in my opinion, these days, it's always a matter of weighing the cost versus the benefit of releasing data, right? ChatGPT has consumed terabytes and terabytes of information available on the web up to 2021. It's going to continue, and newer versions are going to be trained with more and more data. And in my opinion, unless it's something ridiculously sensitive, what we notice is most data that we work with eventually gets published anyway. So if it's available online for scraping or scrubbing, it's going to be picked up by a large language model eventually. And that's why, again, this is just my personal opinion, I see very few situations where I wouldn't feel comfortable personally sharing my own content with ChatGPT, but that's obviously a concern that varies according to organizations, to content types, and that's why we try to remain agnostic as far as that, and leave it up to the user to decide what they want to share and what they don't want to share with an external engine like ChatGPT.
Great.
And as far as I understand, ChatGPT uses all of the data that's fed into it for its own training purposes, but does not disclose that elsewhere. So I feel, again, and this is just a very particularly I statement, I feel okay about sharing my stuff with ChatGPT, but everybody's different, and I respect, understand, and value those who don't want to share anything at all with ChatGPT.
Yep, absolutely, and that's the open-ended viewpoint, is that let's look at this stuff with open eyes and go forward. Okay, so another question. Let's see. How well does ChatGPT handle placeholder elements? Could you provide an example?
Yeah, for this demo, I didn't prepare anything with placeholders. I think that this text that I uploaded doesn't have any, but it does an amazing job with placeholders. I mean, it figures, at least based on our testing, it didn't miss a single one. So yeah, placeholders are treated perfectly. And I do have some videos that I can share after the call that show examples of placeholder treatments using ChatGPT, and it's so far it's been invariably good.
Very good. Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, and one more question from Nadia. Such approach, of course, requires TMs that specifically allow for AI integration, right? We cannot.
No.
Oh, okay.
If you're a translator and you create an account in BureauWorks, or if you're a translation agency or an enterprise client, if you have an account and you upload your TMs and your glossary, they're automatically compatible with our framework. So if you upload a TMX file, it's automatically compatible with this framework. It doesn't have to be, let's say, AI ready or anything of the sort.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks, Eric. And then, oh, that was Nadia. I'm sorry. And another part of Nadia's questions. There's a few of these coming in. We cannot expect every TMS is going to have it inbuilt, like translations engines at the moment. Okay, so this will be something to help certain TMSs stand out. So I think you answered that quite well. And Gabriel, you've been very interesting to listen to. Any feedback on what we've been doing so far? You like the Local study group?
I love it. I think the study group is an amazing idea and initiative, Marina. I think it's amazing. And again, we're super thankful for the opportunity of being here. I want to make sure I communicate my gratitude and thanks to all our team as well. I mean, we have amazing and an amazing engineering team that's led by our CTO Enrique Cabral and our head of software engineering Van Nilsson. And they're always coming up with new ideas and new possibilities, and they're always pushing the envelope. And we're just in a very exciting phase, I think, of developments, and we like to feel that we're surfing, let's say, the crest of the wave and not just being pounded by it. But we're very open, and interested in having people try it out and hearing their feedback. knowing when it fails, because it does fail. I mean, like I said, it doesn't work the same in all languages, for sure, and it doesn't give always the most consistent results. But so far, what we've seen is already amazing, good enough so that we want to see it in production, good enough so that we want to see people taking advantage of it. And we're learning, tuning, improving every day. So all feedback
Yeah.
is not just welcome, but invited.
Learning about everything gives us an advantage than those that kind of put their head in the sand and go, this is not happening. It's happening. So be aware, learn about it, take it on, and let's see what we can do to improve it. I think you agree.
Absolutely. That's the attitude for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate everybody's questions and everybody's participation, and watch for the recording, and we'll see you next time. See you, everybody.
Take care, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye
See
bye.
you. Bye.